So you're logged into the platform, but of course, getting customers into the platform at scale, we're not necessarily going to want to be creating individual user accounts and inviting them individually into the platform. And also, we want to be able to control what users do see, right? Whether they have admin access and they can see all of the menu options that you could see when we had a quick look in the platform there, or whether they're just given access to one of the modules, or whether they're just given access to some of the cost or indeed some of the recommendations. So when we think about the cloud cost optimization piece, many organizations don't just want to segment their spend from a visibility point of view, the cost per product or the particular cloud or department or region or whatever. They may want to actually limit for their users what access they have to spend. Yeah, and the Flexera platform will let you integrate with any SAML-2 compliant identity provider. And a couple of slides here, but I'm going to take you through in the platform. So we have some constructs of users. Of course, you've got a user account that has been created locally within the Flexera platform. So there is local user management where we can go through. We can invite a user by email. We can specify as part of that process what access permissions and roles they have within the platform. We can specify what parts of cloud spend they can see within the platform, potentially as part of that as well. But we can also, at an org level, right, the organization, the tenant that you have access to, integrate, as I said, with SAML-2 identity providers. The most common is your AD, Okta, but it can be anything that your customers are using. And that will enable us then to effectively give federated access. So you can provision a user within your own directory service. You can give them access to groups within that directory service as part of your regular process for access control within your organization. And Flexera will effectively align to that access control. That could be the creation of a user in real time, which we refer to as just-in-time provisioning. But it could also be the mapping of group membership. So I'm a member of Flexera admins in my Active Directory, and that translates, of course, to access within the platform. So we've got just-in-time provisioning and group sync. The other thing worth mentioning here as well is that then we have obviously groups that can map to the roles. What permissions do I have? Am I an admin? Am I a billing center viewer? Can I see all of the spend or some of the spend? Do I have the manage organization role, which you'll see here is a kind of super admin construct. And then we have another slide, which is really, really tiny, which you might want to read when you take this away. But each of the cloud cost optimization set of permissions here means that we can control a user who is maybe not an admin to say, well, actually, they can view the cloud costs, or they can view credentials, or they've got managed permissions as well. So we've got a degree of role-based access control. But remember, this is on top of whatever permissions, the credentials that we connected, the cloud accounts up to as well. So just because we've got write access to a cloud account to delete snapshots doesn't mean that an individual user can necessarily go in and take those actions within a policy. Now, when you logged in here, you will have put in a username and a password, okay? And that is using the local account database of the Flexera One tenant that you're given access to with your student account. We're going to log in here and actually use our single sign-on. And the way that Flexera implements it is you can actually connect a tenant to one or more directory services, right? So if you've got an organization that is actually, grown by acquisition and is made up of multiple domains, all right, and that maybe doesn't have a single endpoint for SAML, then you can actually add multiple endpoints. But in order for the platform to differentiate between which identity service it's going to, then we use a discovery hint to tell us effectively which SSO config a user is coming into. So you'll notice the URL is just app.flexera.com. We've no idea who's presenting themselves to that endpoint, and therefore where to go to look for authentication, and that's then done by a hint. So for us, it's obviously flexera.com. These have to be unique. So you might find that somebody else has used something if you're going to use something other than the domain name for a customer.
And they are case sensitive as well.
Thank you very much, sir. And they are case sensitive as well. In fact, I think somebody has actually used Flexera without the .com. Thinking that was the right way to kind of go about it. But so that will then obviously go and authenticate me against Okta, which is our identity provider, and will log me in with the permissions that I have within the organization. So in terms of the configuration, admin menu, and again, this will be accessed whatever modules you have, because the IAM is core to the Flexera One platform. You've got user management, you've got group management, invitations, and identity providers. Now, the user management piece actually operates in two ways. So you can choose to have local users within the platform. So that's how it's been set up for your student account. You can choose to allow single sign-on from an identity provider into the platform, but you can actually have both of those modes operating. All right. And again, if you're working with a customer to go through onboarding, get them configured for SAML, SSO integration on their end, but leave it in a mode where the local user database can also be used so that you can log in. Because there's a toggle, and I'll show you in a minute in the UI, that you toggle to enforce single sign-on, and then you're effectively locked out unless you have an account on their domain. And if you've got access to multiple tenants as well, and then you switch over to one that's got single sign-on in, then you're kind of in this loop where it's redirecting you then to their identity provider to log in, right? So just be a little cautious of that as well. So for most of our customers, we actually operate in a kind of mixed mode of operation. As soon as they move to SSO only, it becomes very difficult to support them, let alone do the onboarding, because it effectively blocks support from accessing the platform as well. Now, the local user table that we've got here will update with single sign-in users, right? So if you SSO in and it creates a brand new user, you're going to see them appear in the table here. And you'll also get a sense of when they were obviously invited in and created, when they logged in, but also API access tokens that we're going to come on and use for some of the labs will also be captured here. If you want to add in a new user manually, then, or the customer themselves want to do so, then you go into the invite user. That takes you effectively then into this invitations menu item here at the top. You can get a list of what has been sent out and the status. So we can see actually here that we've got users have been invited in and they're pending, right? They've not accepted those invites, but you'll also see that these will expire. So if you send out something out to a user and they do not then accept that invite and go through the process, then that will expire. You've got an option to resend that. You can see which roles and groups and things that they were given access to at the point of being invited. To do a new one, you're going to go in, you're going to enter the email address of who you want to invite into the platform. You can't do this as a comma separated list or anything like this. It's a one-off process. So again, encourage users that at scale at least to integrate with SSO. And then we're into the permissions, right? So I'm not going to go through a full list of these, but any of them that you toggle over here will give you a tooltip, will tell you what the specific permissions are. And as we said, this particular tenant has got all of the modules. So I've got everything for asset management, IT visibility, and so on. But whatever you do, you've got then this manage organization super user. When you're inviting users then in, you can also add users into groups. This will be a construct that I'm sure you're familiar with, but we can effectively group together a set of permissions or rights that enables me to say, this is the admin group, this is the cloud view group, right? So it's a grouping of roles and permissions. So cost optimization administrator group gives us, of course, the administrator rights, like it's actually set in this one. And you can see any users that have been added into those particular groups. One area that's specific, however, to the cloud cost optimization module is billing centers. And we're going to come on and talk about this construct, but it's a way of separating cost, of allocating cost into groups. It's a logical construct within the Flexera platform, but it can be based on account boundaries, tags, and other metadata. And this enables you to then control who can see what spend within the cloud cost optimization module. Okay, so I can add a user to a particular billing center or add a group to a billing center. And if we look at the ones in the demo environment here, that might be that I only see engineering spend because I'm the engineering manager. It might be that I see the marketing things, or it might be that I have access to more than one and I can see both of those constructs. The other thing that this does at a billing center level is control which recommendations you see, right? So we talked about rate and usage recommendations for managing that cloud cost. Our recommendations are contextualized by this billing center structure, and we'll talk more about it, as I said. But so as an engineering manager, I would see the costs of the engineering applications or workloads, but I would also just see the recommendations for those workloads. And that can be really helpful, right? So if you've got an organization with tens or even hundreds of millions of dollars of spend, then seeing the recommendations that are relevant to your team or your function or your role or your department, whatever it might be, rather than the whole set of things, can actually be quite useful, right? Because it's about getting the right information to the right people so that they can take action. And if it's, of course, meaningful and you don't have to go digging through everybody else's set of kind of recommendations, then that's going to help in the process. You'll see then under identity providers, this is where we would go and configure single sign-on. I'm not going to go through the whole process, but you can see here, that multiple IDPs can be supported within a single tenant. As I said, you can log in from multiple domains. You'll see here the status of this tenant, right? So single sign-on is not enforced. And that would be where if I enforce that, nobody can create a local user and log in. So again, just be aware of that. There's a ton of help. So when we went through the UI, the help button is here. There is a lot of information here. You can see it's context sensitive, right? So I was on the identity provider page, and that has taken me into the IDP menu item here. And then there's all of the detail as to what SAML is and how you would go about setting that up, including the mandatory assertions and things that we need to support that single sign-on and group membership synchronization. So again, probably one for taking away, and I don't know if you've got Sandpit environment or something that you can try that with. Troubleshooting is usually, and I'll take you through this now, the process is, of course, configuring the identity provider details, with the information here. But what we require users to do is verify their domain, okay, so that you can't effectively do domain hijacking and put in someone else's domain here and go, yeah, right, I can log in now using salesforce.com or whatever it might be. And in order to do that verification, it's in the documentation, then you add a text record to the DNS record for the domain with a unique verification code that gets generated at the time. And if they don't go and do that step and actually add that entry and verify, then obviously nothing's going to work, right? It won't be enabled until that step is completed. If you're onboarding with a large organization, then getting a change ticket for someone to go in and do DNS administration, which is effectively what that is going to be, can take some time. So start this conversation early on, right? Many organizations kind of have that outsourced or whatever, the DNS name management and other things. So just be cognizant of that. It can, by exception, be overridden by our engineering teams. So if you've gone through the process and then somebody removes it and you need to add it in again, right, or whatever, then you could raise a support ticket. But it requires, of course, high-level approval within our organization. So try and stick to the process here. But that is the most common one, is that they've done everything up to that point, but they've not verified the domain, and therefore they get an error pop up, an Okta error actually from us, because the domain hasn't been verified at this point. Again, just a couple of points to mention here, right? So then just-in-time provisioning, which is provisioning of a user that has not logged into the platform yet. again, is an option within there. So single sign-on can be implemented. Brand new user that we've not seen can log in and have their user account provisioned. And then the group sync element also to be set up, and again, covered in the documentation.
Yeah, so can I just point out for group sync, and you'll see it here, the default setting when you enable group sync is only to add missing group memberships for the user. But I'm not sure why you would ever want to use that as opposed to a full sync, because if you use a full sync, that means if you remove someone from an Active Directory group or an Okta group, then they'll also be removed from that corresponding group in Flexera 1, which presumably is what you would want. But if you choose that first item, which is the default setting, to add missing groups, then you're only going to be adding them to groups that they're not currently in Flexera 1. But if you remove them from your identity provider group, they will not be removed from that group in Flexera 1. So my recommendation would be, if you're going to turn on group sync, that you always go in and select full sync.
Yep, great stuff. No, absolutely valid. The other thing that comes up sometimes is offboarding processes, right? So you've done a single sign-on, you've created a user on the Flexera platform. That user leaves the organization, right? Now, SAML does not support a kind of offboarding process. There's no kind of SAML delete process that will say, actually, the user now doesn't exist in your identity provider, and therefore we'll delete the user account on that side. There are other single sign-on technologies, newer versions that do support that, but we're aligned with SAML 2 at the moment. So that user access control and onboarding process is absolutely down to the organization and your processes for removing that access from their domain, but that's not going to delete necessarily a user account on our side, and there is no formal process to do that.
Also, the groups are cumulative, so if somebody's in two groups, they get the rights from both groups. It's not like, if you're familiar with the ITAM, you can deny and you can, what was the other one, disallow. There's no concept of that, so be careful with group overlap. And then with the group synchronization, Azure can be a little tricky and it's documented in the documentation. Like with Okta, group name and then description is the group ID. In Okta, it's flip-flopped. So you gotta define your groups by the really long alphanumeric name to get them to sync correctly with Azure AD.
The last thing then to cover really from an IAM point of view was, we said obviously you can control access to billing centers to segment spend and recommendations. You will see that as an admin, of course, I've got access to the users within a billing center, right? So this is a segmentation of spend here. I've got users or groups that can be added to these billing centers, okay? And so you can't do this bit in the IAM section. You have to come into the billing centers and specify whether either users or groups have viewer or admin rights to those individual billing centers.